Hope your work week is off to a good start. You're watching the Daily Report for Monday, March 14th. I'm Min Sanhi. We have a number of revisions to COVID-19 guidelines here on the local front. Here first are the global tallies with our Kwonswa. So let's begin with the latest here in Korea for this Monday.
Sunny, Korea is starting off the new work week with more than 300,000 COVID-19 infections. Let's take a closer look. 309,790 cases were tallied as of 12 a.m. and that marks the highest figure for a Monday. And apart from 62 imported cases, the rest of them are domestic transmissions. And we had a record high figure on Saturday with over 380,000 infections in just a day. Now, since then, the tally has gone down slightly. However, for the third straight day, infections are now hovering in the 300,000s. And if we move over to our map, we see that more than half of the nation's 17 provinces or major cities are reported at least 5-digit figures of new COVID-19 infections. And if we go over to the number of total infections here in the country, we now have more than 6.8 million cases. And over the weekend, we have also surpassed the 10,000 milestone in COVID-19 related deaths. In the past day, also 200 people have lost their lives due to this virus. And since it was the weekend, we did not have too many vaccinations happening. But first, let's take a look at the number of severe or critical cases currently. In the past week straight, we are seeing more than 1,000 people that are in severe or critical condition, and 1,158 as of 12 a.m. this Monday. This marks a record high, as the last time we had a record high was in late December last year, when we were still dealing with the Delta wave. And now let's move over to the vaccination figures. We only got double-digit figures of new vaccinations over the weekend when it comes to the first and second dose, and also just a triple-digit figure in booster shots that have been administered over the weekend. The total number now standing a little above 32.1 million. Let's move over to the international figures. With 1.3 million cases in the past day, we have an accumulated caseload of over 458 million. And there's been a rise by around 6% of infections in the past week. Now, meanwhile, based on figures by Worldometers, if we go over to the next table, we have here South Korea, Vietnam, and Germany. These three countries have accounted for more than 40% of cases in the past week. And those are the general updates I have for now, but I'll have more international updates in a bit. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, so thank you for now. Right, revisions continue to be made to streamline Korea's response to Omicron. For more, I have Han Sung-woo here in the studio. Sung-woo, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Happy to be here.
Right, let's start with the latest on COVID-19 vaccinations for children here in the country then.
Well, Sunny, it was announced this morning that Korea will start vaccinating children aged 5 to 11 at around 1,200 designated medical institutions nationwide on the 31st of this month. Reservations begin in just 10 days, next Thursday, a week before the first shots are administered. Health officials say they're going to start with minors at high risk, such as those with weak immune systems.
Countries that started before us have shown vaccinating children is safe and effective. We took into consideration that those 11 years old and under account for 15% of the infected population.
The Ministry of Food and Drug Safety last month approved the use of Pfizer's vaccine for the age group at a dosage level that's 1/3 the amount given to adults. The development comes amid a rise in positive tests among children. Authorities also mentioned that booster shots for kids between the age of 12 and 17 have started today as well. Let me also mention that students and teachers who live with someone who has COVID-19 can still attend school in person starting today. Instead of entering self-isolation, they're advised to receive PCR tests within 3 days of their family member testing positive before taking a rapid antigen test on the 6th or 7th day. However, there are concerns whether this is the right move at this juncture, considering the surge in cases, with some fearing another wave of infections could close down schools again.
Right, so as long as they test negative, they can partake in in-person school activities then?
That's right, regardless of their vaccination status for students and children.
Right, and moving forward, Sangwoo, I hear rapid antigen tests can now serve as a formal diagnosis for COVID-19.
That is correct. Rapid antigen tests, results conducted by medical professionals at local hospitals or clinics, will be accepted for official purposes. That means the results will have the same validity as PCR tests in confirming COVID-19 infections, relieving citizens who test positive via rapid antigen tests of the need to stop by a screening center and wait in long lines to get PCR tested. At the same time, healthcare workers will be able to focus their time and efforts on the elderly and those at high risk. Sources are telling me, though, that the lines of these designated clinics are already quite long, with some even anxiously waiting for 1 or 2 hours. The decision comes as recent data showed almost 95% of people who tested positive on a rapid antigen test tested positive through a PCR test as well. The change will allow those over 60 to be prescribed with the oral COVID-19 treatment, Paxlovid, just with proof of a positive rapid antigen test. People who test positive by testing themselves at home or at screening centers via self-test kits, however, will not be officially classified as an infection case. The shift falls in line with the government's recent transition to focus on treating serious cases and preventing deaths, even ending its rigorous contact tracing program amid a shortage in medical resources.
And before you go, Sangwoo, do give us a quick rundown of our current Omicron outbreak, including, of course, the tallies mentioned by Suwa earlier on.
Sure. For starters, the number of patients who are in currently severely ill condition reached an all-time high of 1,158. And with 200 more virus-related fatalities recorded, the death toll stands at just under 10,600. Nearly 67% of intensive care beds are occupied, which authorities say is manageable at this point, but the percentage hikes up to nearly 75% when only considering areas outside the capital region. A total of 1.61 million people are undergoing at-home treatment, by the way, increasing by nearly 43,000 from yesterday. Health authorities predict the Omicron surge will reach its peak sometime before March 22nd, possibly within this week, and they expect the daily average over a week during that period to be between 295 and 372,000, with the number of those severely ill at around 2,000. Government data shows the number of severely ill patients and fatalities last week increased 1.4 and 1.5 times respectively compared to the week before. Virus-related deaths came to 1,348 last week, 2.5 times the figure reported between February 20th and the 26th. Let me add that the government just revealed they will be discussing changes to the current social distancing scheme in place this week. The current system, which lasts until Sunday, restricts private gatherings to 6 people max and business hours of restaurants and cafes to until 11 p.m.
Right, and you'll probably give us the updates later on this week then. Sangwoo, thank you for the details for now.
Thank you for having me.
Right, meanwhile, the new name on the COVID-19 block appears to be Deltacron, excuse me, but I do remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, we talked about this a while back.
Right, Sunny. Actually, back in early January, it was when the scientists in Cyprus claimed to have detected this new hybrid variant, which has traits of the Delta and Omicron variant. But shortly after, other experts suggested the emergence was attributed to contamination during laboratory testing. So why now has the so-called Deltacron reappeared on the headlines? Now, this is because more cases of what appears to be a recombinant of the Delta and Omicron variants are being detected here and there. A new study that was released over the weekend in the U.S. suggests 2 Deltacron cases have been identified since January. Dozens have been detected in the UK, and the World Health Organization last week confirmed such cases in Denmark, France, and the Netherlands, adding though the levels of detection were very low. As alarming as the emergence or confirmation of this version of the coronavirus may sound, researchers say it is extremely rare, and the fact alone that it existed back in January and has not shown a potential to grow rapidly should stem any sense of panic. There is, meanwhile, little knowledge on whether Deltacron is more severe than other strains. And then there are also experts who are still doubting the existence of Deltacron and say that they are waiting for more evidence to come out.
I see. And on the international front, staying there, so I hear countries in Europe are moving ahead with their lifting of COVID-19 restrictions.
Right, Sunny. So, for instance, France is getting rid of almost all COVID-19 related measures starting on Monday local time. Now, the vaccine pass system has been suspended, and the wearing of face masks at most indoor venues, public spaces and schools are also no longer compulsory. Public transportation, medical facilities and nursing homes are exceptions, though. France, however, has been dealing with an uptick in COVID-19 cases lately, with roughly 70,000 daily infections in the past week, an on-week rise by around 20%. Meanwhile, to protect elderly citizens, officials announced that fourth COVID-19 vaccine doses or second booster shots would be offered to people over 80 years old. Concerns over a planned nationwide lifting of COVID-19 restrictions in Germany starting on March 20th are growing as well, as the country is still recording unprecedented figures, recently having surpassed 250,000 daily infections. The nation's 7-day incidence rate surpassed 1,500 per 100,000 people for the first time on Sunday.
Meanwhile, back here in this part of the world, in sharp contrast to the reality over in Europe, I understand China is choosing to impose strict lockdowns. So tell us about that.
Right. China, known for its stringent zero COVID approach, that is countering the Omicron wave as it has been doing during previous waves. As COVID-19 cases have doubled to around 3,400 on Sunday, authorities imposed lockdowns in hotspots across the country and shut down schools as well, including in Shanghai and numerous cities in the northeast. At least 18 provinces are reportedly dealing with cluster infections of the Omicron and Delta variants. In another major city, the southern tech hub Shenzhen, bordering Hong Kong, its entire population of around 17 million have been put under a lockdown for at least a week, and with many people not having been able to prepare for that abrupt decision, which was announced on Sunday evening or night. Now, residents will also have to go through 3 rounds of COVID-19 screenings in the coming days, and those residents will be adults that have to go through these testings. And also, speaking about Hong Kong, some updates on Hong Kong as well. Around 300,000 people are said to be currently in isolation or under home quarantine, and also the death toll is nearing 4,000. As of Sunday, 3,993 people were said to have lost their lives due to COVID-19. And to put that into perspective, that is more than Wuhan City, which was, as we know, the first epicenter of the coronavirus in the world.
Right, I see. So as always, thank you very much for the updates. I'll see you on Tuesday.
See you on Tuesday, Sunny.
In our headlines on this Monday afternoon, well into its 3rd week, Kremlin's military campaign in Ukraine marked one of its grimmest assaults this past weekend, with airstrikes targeted at a military training base near the border with Poland. Our Min Soo-kyun has the latest.
Russian attacks continued on Sunday with a spat of airstrikes on a military training ground near Lviv in western Ukraine. Officials in Ukraine confirmed that at least 35 people have been killed and hundreds injured. At a briefing, Russia's defense ministry spokesperson said the airstrike had destroyed a large amount of weapons supplied by foreign nations that were being stored at the training facility, which previously hosted NATO military instructors. He claimed the strike killed up to 180 foreign mercenaries and said that Moscow will continue to eliminate those arriving to fight in Ukraine. The assault on the Yavor military compound has now brought the war closer to the Polish border, just 25 kilometers away. Moscow had earlier warned that convoys of Western arms shipments to Ukraine could be considered legitimate targets. With Russia stepping up its bombardment of Ukrainian cities, including the capital Kyiv, it's feared that more and more civilians will suffer from the fierce fighting. In the besieged port city of Mariupol, hundreds of thousands of people remain trapped without food, water, and medical supplies, and more than 2,000 residents have been killed so far, according to the city council. There are still hopes, however, that last-minute diplomacy could spare further devastation. Russian and Ukraine officials have said that talks between the two countries will resume on Monday through a video conference call. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the main task of his delegation in talks with the Russian counterparts is to arrange a meeting between President Putin and himself.
Representatives of our countries are holding daily talks via video conference. Our delegation has a clear task to do everything to arrange a meeting between the presidents. The meeting, I'm sure, people are waiting for. It's clear that it's a difficult story, a difficult path, but we need that path.
Zelensky also repeated calls for NATO to implement a no-fly zone over Ukraine, warning that it's only a matter of time before Russian missiles fall on NATO territory and the home of NATO citizens. Meanwhile, top aides from the US and China are expected to meet in Rome on Monday to discuss the ongoing war in Ukraine as worries mount that the conflict will take an even darker turn. Min Suk-hyun, Arirang News.
Here on the Korean Peninsula, Pyongyang may engage in yet another missile test launch within this week. Our North Korea correspondent Kim Da-mi has more on these grim prospects.
Sources say North Korea is on the verge of a new intercontinental ballistic missile launch, potentially within the next day or two. According to South Korean and U.S. military intelligence sources on Sunday, signs of launch preparation have been detected. Experts say the upcoming activity will highly likely be similar to recent launches that the regime claimed were reconnaissance satellites and not ICBMs.
Kim Jong-un has ordered expansion and development of the North satellite systems, but that can't happen overnight. So the next launch will be like the last one or something a little bit more advanced than that.
He added that any upcoming reconnaissance satellite launch would actually be yet more cover for the North's ICBM development, as satellite and ICBM launches require similar technology. Visiting the Dongchangri satellite launch site last week, Kim also ordered the construction of a new outdoor launch observatory, which watchers note are part of birthday celebration plans for the North's founding leader Kim Il-sung next month. The Dongchangri site is where Pyongyang declared a self-imposed nuclear moratorium ahead of the first North Korea-U.S. summit in 2018. But another expert says the North will not break that promise yet, pointing out the next launch is aimed at putting pressure on the Biden administration.
If the North violates the moratorium, then there is no room for talks. The North wants negotiations, not to completely destroy the moratorium. The North is in a lot of trouble internally, and there will be no solution to these issues if promises are broken.
According to South Korea's defense ministry last week, the North appears to be repairing part of tunnels at its Punggye-ri nuclear site, which was dismantled in 2018. While the Joint Chiefs of Staff is keeping close tabs on Pyongyang's activities, Seoul's Unification Ministry on Monday once again urged the North to immediately halt actions that go against peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula and take a path of dialogue and cooperation. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
On the export front, new ministry figures show Korea's overseas shipments of ICT products expanded further last month. Lee Tae-yeon has more on the upbeat findings.
South Korea's tech exports last month saw a record-high figure for the month of February. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy released a report on Monday showing that the country's ICT exports stood at almost $18.9 billion. This is a 23.7% rise compared to the same period last year. It's also the 11th straight month of double-digit on-year growth. One of the key export items, semiconductors, rose for 20th month in a row with around $10.4 billion of shipments. This is a 24% increase compared to a same period last year, and is the 10th straight month that it has been over the $10 billion mark. Exports for both memory and system chips saw a hike as the smartphone and foundry industry thrived. Outbound shipments of displays increased over 39% on year in February, with more than $2.2 billion of exports, mainly on the back of high demand for OLED displays. Shipments of computers and related equipment also jumped over 47% on year, recording more than $1.5 billion. But mobile phone exports dropped by around 5%, reaching $980 million. However, the ministry said due to a new model release in February, phone components saw an increase by more than 18% on year. ICT exports to 5 major destinations, including the US, European Union, and Vietnam, have all risen compared to the same period last year, with exports to China increasing by 20.7% and the US by 14.5%. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Kurdish officials say a dozen ballistic missiles launched from outside of Iraq struck the country's northern Kurdish regional capital, Erbil, on Sunday, with the U.S. officials speaking on condition of anonymity, saying they were launched from Iran. Later in the day, Iran did claim responsibility for the barrage of ballistic missiles, saying it was retaliation for an Israeli strike in Syria that killed 2 members of its Revolutionary Guard Corps. However, the missiles also struck areas around the U.S. consulate in Erbil. While no injuries were reported in the attack, it marks a significant escalation between the U.S. and Iran. Hostility between Washington and Tehran have played out in Iraq, whose government is allied with both countries. Guatemalan President Alejandro Giammattei said he would veto a bill that seeks to increase abortion penalties to up to 25 years in prison and prohibit same-sex marriage, calling it unconstitutional and a violation of international convention. The bill was revived by the conservative Viva Party after being put on hold in 2018 before being passed last Tuesday by lawmakers from different parties, including some allies of the president. Giammattei says the bill had not been backed by his administration, stressing his opposition to it. The 2022 Beijing Winter Paralympics ended on Sunday with a closing ceremony at the National Stadium carrying a message of love. In closing remarks, IPC President Andrew Parsons said he would hope that the Paralympian movement would inspire world leaders to unite. Meanwhile, Chinese President Xi Jinping attended the closing ceremony in front of an audience of 30,000 and 1,000 athletes and representatives. The Paralympic flag was later lowered and handed over to the vice mayor of Milan and the mayor of Cortina, the Italian cities that will co-host the 2026 Winter Games. Manchester United star footballer Cristiano Ronaldo made history on Saturday, becoming pro football's all-time leading scorer with 807 goals, following his hat-trick against Tottenham Hotspur. While the all-time top goal scorer title is much contested, FIFA says Austro-Czech Josef Bican netted 805 goals from 1931 to 1955. Ronaldo's goals have been scored for Sporting Lisbon, United, Real Madrid, Juventus, and the Portuguese national team. Brazilian strikers Pelé and Romario each scored more than 1,000 goals during their careers, but these statistics include goals in amateur, unofficial, and friendly matches. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Topping entertainment headlines this past week was news about BTS's comeback onto the local stage, much to the delight of fans here and elsewhere. We have more in this following report.
On March 10th, BTS held its first concert in Korea since October of 2019, after a long hiatus lasting more than 2 years due to the fallout of COVID-19. However, strict COVID-19 rules were in place, given the large crowds that were present at the venue.
좀 걱정은 많이 됐는데요. 그래도 보고 싶은 마음이 커서 저도 코로나 걸릴까 봐 계속 밖에 나가서 밥도 안 먹고 좀 조심하다가 공연에 온 것 같아요.
I wouldn't say that I'm worrying about it because I got my booster recently, so I hope it will be fine. And also I know that organizers, they're doing a lot of actions to prevent any spreading of COVID, so I'm kind of happy with it also, so I'm not worrying.
일단 마스크 2개도 쓰고 계속 자가 키트도 하고 해가지고 최대한 피해 가지 않게 하려고 노력하고 있어서 일단은 보니까 가드분들도 다 노력해 주시는 것 같고 해서 잘 진행이 됐으면 좋겠어요.
It was a long wait, but the fans were rewarded with a 140-minute performance where BTS sang 22 of their favorite tracks.
저희가 언제 한번 이렇게 박수로 맞는 콘서트를 해보겠습니다. 역사에 남을 콘서트예요. 그렇지 않습니까, 비시민들이야?
Over its 3-day run, BTS drew an average of 15,000 fans on every concert night. COVID-19 guidelines put forth by the Korean government had allowed a maximum capacity limit of 50% for outdoor concerts. However, in light of Korea's Omicron situation, the concert organizers held the event at a lower self-imposed capacity limit of just 23%. There were also a number of fan restrictions in place, including a ban on singing, standing, and cheering.
코로나 때문에 함성 같은 거는 못 지르고 이런 이제 클래퍼라고 해서 따로 박수를 칠 수 있는 이런 걸 만들어서 응원을 할 수 있다는 게 그것도 참 다행인 것 같아요.
The COVID-19 pandemic had forced BTS and many other K-pop artists to shelve their concert plans indefinitely. It created a void and a sense of disconnect that was keenly felt by both the artists and their fans over the past 2 years.
2년 동안 저희가 이제 데이터를 보면은 악동 뮤지션이라든가 더보이즈 그리고 트와이스 그리고 샤이니 태미씨 같은 분들이 이제 공연이 취소된 사례가 있습니다. 2020년 2월부터 올해 22년 2월까지 2년 동안 취소된 공연이나 연기된 공연 피해 사례를 조사를 했었고요. 그 2년 동안 지금 총 취소된 공연이 1,301건이고요. 피해 규모는 2,255억으로 추산을 하고 있습니다.
공연업계, 대중음악 업계가 힘든 것도 있지만 이 팬들과 아티스트 분들의 소통, 직접 만나고 싶고 보고 싶고 이런 마음이 지금 극에 달해 있는 것 같습니다. 팬문화, 대중문화라는 것이 경험하고 싶은 게 자연스러운 거라고 생각됩니다.
BTS had earlier held a concert in the US back in November of 2021 and were greeted by 50,000 fans in Los Angeles in their first live performance since the start of the pandemic. No attendance limits were imposed, and the venue was allowed to fill all of their seats. So as long as the ticket holders provided their vaccination cards or a negative COVID-19 test result at the gates.
Seeing all the fans, seeing the stadium filled with all the fans yesterday got me really emotional, beyond words. Going back on track and seeing all the fans, seeing all the people, and finally in 2 years, this really make us feel like this really is the beginning of our new chapter.
Meanwhile, BTS's return to the stage in Korea is serving as a beacon of hope for Korea's pandemic-hit music industry.
BTS가 그 포문을 열어준 셈이죠. 이 정도의 대규모 콘서트도 지금 현재 가능하다, 아무 문제 없다라는 거를 입증해주는 사례가 되기 때문에 사실 쉽지 않은 결정임에도 불구하고 이제 BTS나 그 관계자분들이 진행해준 것에 대해서 굉장히 감사한 마음을 갖고 있습니다.
Other K-pop artists have followed closely on the heels of BTS by announcing new concert dates, helping to breathe new life into the country's beleaguered live performance industry.
기본적인 지침인 마스크 착용, 함성, 떼창 금지는 최대한 지킬 수 있도록 안내하고 준비하겠습니다. 그리고 안전한 공연을 위해 증상이 있으신 관객분들은 집에서 쉴 수 있어야 되고요. 그리고 출연진, 스태프분들도 공연 전 최대한 조심히 준비해서 공연을 늘 준비하도록 하겠습니다.
BTS is back with a bang, in what is hoped to be a sign of a broader comeback in Korea's concert industry.
There have been a number of changes in Korea's response measures to Omicron as authorities hope its peak will ultimately lead to a visible transition into a new normal. For more, I have Professor David Kwak from Suncheon University. Professor Kwak, welcome back.
Good afternoon, Sunny.
I also have Dr. Kim Seung-taek at Institute Pasteur Korea live on the line. Dr. Kim, it's good to see you.
Good afternoon.
Professor Kwak, we'll start here in the studio. Authorities believe Korea's Omicron wave will peak within the next week or two and then start to decline. Do you share this outlook?
Well, now I have to. I have been saying for the past 3-4 weeks that there were other projections made by other associations that it was also likely to happen on 6th of March. We already passed a few days of that, and we're still seeing the graph steeply go up. If the correct projection was made by the government, and they said that we will be likely to see the peak in the mid of March, which falls hopefully within this week and next week, and hopefully we'll go over the peak in that period, and hopefully also we'll see a steep decline after that.
Right. And Dr. Kim, what would you say are some of the most concerning aspects, that is, of our current COVID-19 situation?
Well, currently, as just earlier mentioned, we are actually just seeing over the 300,000 of just a total number of COVID-19 infection, and typically we observe the number of severe patient numbers is like after at least a week after confirming the COVID-19. So then maybe just the most concern is that whether we are the number of severe COVID-19 patients is increases. Well, as of now, the number is just a little over 1,000. But I'm just kind of worried that if our healthcare system can deal with the maybe just potentially some more increasing number of severe COVID-19 patients. Yeah, that's it.
Dr. Kim, starting on this Monday, positive rapid antigen test results will be accepted as formal diagnosis of COVID-19, as reported by my colleague Song-woo earlier on. What are your thoughts on this shift in testing strategy?
Well, I think this is just basically there are just a way to number too many the PCR tests are just being done right now, and then subsequently there's a kind of a delayed notification of the whether infection is just on or off. Is possible or not, and then subsequently the speed of the prescription, and then by doing this fast the diagnosis in the more the expedited manner, this will actually just enable some more faster the prescription. But we have to just keep in mind that this is only for the people with over 60 years of age, and then for the 40s and then the 50s or some underlying medical condition, they still need some PCR test results before just a prescription. And then this fast test and then the fast prescription is very important, especially for some oral drugs that we are actually using right now, because this is an antiviral drug, and considering their mechanism of action, the fast the prescription and the use of this drug is very critical to obtain some best performance of these oral drugs.
Right. And in the meantime then, Professor Kwak, what do you propose then to address the relative inaccuracy of rapid antigen tests as compared to their PCR counterparts?
Right. So let me begin by distinguishing the accuracy of the rapid antigen test versus the PCR test. PCR test, as originally tested to confirm the diagnosis of COVID-19, is actually an amplification of any sort of genetic material within the human body of COVID-19. So it amplifies even a dissected particle of SARS-CoV-2 virus, meaning if there was to be remaining particle long time after an infection, it'll show up in the PCR test. So we have set roughly at around 31, in between 31 to 35 of cyclic value. If it shows up in the RT-PCR, we would consider that to be positive of COVID-19 infection, meaning something that's less of a 31 cyclic value would be considered to be a current infection of COVID-19. Anything beyond that is clinically suspected to be either remaining particle from past infection, or it could be something of the persons being exposed to COVID-19 and not actually being infected. Of course, being tested negative from RT-PCR would definitely mean that the person has not COVID-19 because there is not even a dissected particle remaining from the original virus strain. Now, going to rapid antigen test. Antigen is a molecule that shows up in human body once the virus infects human cells. So it starts testing positive not immediately after infection, but after a certain period of time. Usually we suspect that to be either 1 to 3 days, but antigen starts to go up during the infection and it slowly goes back down when the infection is over. So it's probably the second accurate diagnostic tool for diagnosis of COVID-19. Now, that being said, the paradigm of diagnosing patients with COVID-19 has changed in Korea since the beginning of pandemic to the current time. Because in the beginning, or until the Delta variant, we needed to have traced back all possible contacts of COVID-19 to make sure that it no longer passes on to anyone else. So we needed the strictest tool possible to pick out everyone who's having COVID-19 infection, make sure they don't go around and transmit to others. Now, as we're seeing more than 300,000 of daily confirmation cases. It's inevitable that we are not able to prevent any further transmission, even if we try to. So now the paradigm has shifted to where, clinically speaking, we need to focus on treating those patients who may be more vulnerable to become more sick, rather than preventing transmission completely. In that regard, RT-PCR has less of the value than picking up who might be going through infection itself currently. So it's no longer quote-unquote required for a person to receive RT-PCR, but rather we should use a method that picks diagnosis much faster than the others, and also which is more accessible. Obviously, that will be rapid antigen in the case. So that because of that, even though rapid antigen test tends to be less accurate than RT-PCR, clinically speaking, rapid antigen test is also currently needed. Now, let me just add one more thing quickly, though. Rapid antigen test has a very strong sensitivity rate as opposed to very weak specificity rate, meaning it has a tendency to show great numbers of false negative. But once it tests positive, it is very, very likely the person is actually positive. So we need to make sure it is used righteously for its own purpose. It is used to pick up a person who's positive, but it should not be used to make sure the person is negative, because there will be so many cases of false negatives. Let's just make sure of that.
Right. And Dr. Kim, what can you tell us about the accuracy of PCR tests based on throat swabs that have been approved for mobile testing units over at schools?
Well, I think this starts from the actually complaining of the school-aged children, and because of the very frequent just the testing, especially just the collecting the specimen from the nasal cavity. They actually just complain about the discomfort by this procedure. So then some government actually just chose maybe just a throat swab instead of the nasal cavity swab. And in the beginning, the swabbing, collecting the samples actually were just three different positions. I mean, in China originally, they actually collect the specimens from the actually nasal cavity and then throat, and also sometimes a nasal anal swab. So, but the last one is actually very discomforting, and then probably most people wouldn't like it. So the nasal swab and then the throat swab is kind of just a common standard. And I think for the PCR test, well, the actually viral replication actually it's not really just uniform on the in terms of just the infection course. Well, depending on also depending on the variant of this SARS-CoV-2, sometimes the virus replication starts from some other parts of the respiratory tract, and it's kind of just a viral load is actually changes over the some infection courses. So many places, if we pick just many area from our respiratory tract, the chances are we are actually just testing were more sensitivity. But then I think considering all the complaining about some discomfort, I think especially for the PCR test, I think throat swab maybe just enough, just sensitive enough. And for the some rapid antigen test, and there's also some debate whether like those are nasal swab or just a throat swab is just enough. And then, well, I think for the even just the rapid antigen test, I think one of the funny thing is that several teenagers actually tested some rapid antigen test with many different kinds of just the liquids, including some beverages. And then, well, interestingly, just some lemon juice, for sort of like some acidic just beverages, and also sodas actually make just the test positive. And then, so I think one of the things that we can actually recommend is that before just taking just the samples, maybe just blowing nose and then just rinse just the mouth. Maybe just also it's one of the recommendations we can actually suggest.
Right, I see. And meanwhile, Professor Kwak, mild COVID-19 patients can now be treated within regular hospital wards. Having said that, how is your hospital responding to this change in treatment protocol?
Right. So the formal guideline that was made by the government recently was for the bigger hospitals to start allowing patients from past COVID-19 infection, once they become milder in symptoms from their severe course of it, to be allowed to stay non-COVID-19 isolation booths. So a couple of much bigger hospitals, such as Seoul National University Hospital and Asan Hospital, has started actually allowing patients recovering from COVID-19, showing only very mild cases, to be allowed to stay within a regular admission ward. But they are actually still having them being admitted in individual rooms instead of the regular 6 people, 8 people admission wards that we would ordinarily see in the TV. So it's not exactly the case where just COVID-19 patients started just going into a regular admission room. It is the same in our hospital as well. So for the patient who has gone through a severe course of COVID-19 but has recovered and showing very mild symptoms only, but also showing possibly remaining particles through RT-PCR, are currently allowed to stay in regular individual rooms, not just completely in the negative pressure isolation booths. So that is being conducted at our hospital as well. I think government, because of lack of resources that we're facing nationally, the government wants to utilize as much as possible of any of the resources that we currently have. So they want to allow actual COVID-19 patients to be treated at regular clinics. The biggest concern that I have about that is still the transmission rate. We still have those people who would be vulnerable still be visiting hospitals that have not been completely immunized against COVID-19 to possibly be exposed to the viral particle from the hospital if they were to come close to a transmissible person per se. So I don't think allowing all clinics to suddenly start treating for COVID-19 patients is the best idea currently, but we need something in the middle, in between the steps, where we still need to take care of COVID-19 patients recovering, not completely exposed to non-immunized people. So we need to find possibly the alternative that I'm thinking of is designating other bigger sized local hospitals to mainly focus on COVID-19 patients only, even those who recovered from it, but isolating or differentiating those who have not been immunized COVID-19 to actually still go to non-COVID-19 hospitals yet.
Right, and talking about protecting people from COVID-19, let's talk about COVID-19 vaccination for children here in the country, Professor Kwak. Those aged 5 to 11 will now be able to receive their vaccine starting late this month with the Pfizer vaccine, of course. What are your thoughts on this inoculation initiative?
Well, you already see the smile on my face. I have been requesting and demanding on many programs that the government should start allowing these children between ages of 5 to 11 to receive the vaccine. I still don't think it should be a mandate, because the parents or the patients themselves still needs to be free to choose for themselves to receive the vaccine. But as a parent of 3 children, I do plan on getting my children vaccinated, because as we have seen from the reports, there are rare but still happening cases of children going through severe courses of COVID-19, let alone for even younger children who has a underdeveloped respiratory tract. They're also prone to have a condition called croup, which is a constrictions in the airways. They have more difficulty breathing and whatnot. That is not entirely primarily due to COVID-19, but it's a condition that can stem from multiple different types of viruses. So, in essence, COVID-19 vaccines still would benefit these children between those ages very, very much. And I very welcome the decision by the government to start allowing these children as well.
Right. And moving forward, Dr. Kim, what can you tell us about the so-called Delta Crohn that my colleague Soa mentioned earlier on, which has been making COVID-19 headlines in recent days?
Right. And also, as you just guys discussed, this is not just the first time that you're actually talking about Delta Crohn. This was also just suggested or just reported just last January. And then in that time, actually, most of the experts say that, well, maybe this is just due to the some laboratory contamination issues. And then probably no one actually took this very seriously. But now, just in some several countries, this sort of just the Delta Crohn seems to just appear. And then, also some people said instead of Delta Crohn, they say Delta Omicron and whatever names. And that as the name means that this, but basically based on the some genetic just sequencing the data analysis, the virus seems to have both just genetic information from the Omicron and then the Delta. And then if we look at the more just in detail some genetic just the makeup of these viruses, the spike gene seems to come from the Omicron variant, but the rest of the viral gene actually came from the Delta variant. What that means is that, well, obviously we have actually just wait what the variant means in terms of public health and also other some diagnosis, the vaccine, and then the treatment. But at least based on this genetic maker, what you can actually just tell is that maybe the vaccine that we are actually using right now still be very effective. And especially the person who had already got infected by the Omicron will have a very strong neutralizing antibody against the Delta Crohn. And then for others, for example, like some transmissibility and then the severity, well, we actually have to wait for the further study, the results actually just come out.
I see, but for the time being, we do not have to panic too much then.
No, not at all.
On the local academic arena, Professor Kwak, under new COVID-19 guidelines, students, regardless of their vaccination status, can attend school even if they're residing with a COVID-19 patient. Having said that, what precautions do you recommend?
Well, obviously, the only method that we have as a prevention tool is really still the vaccination. So I strongly suggest those teenagers and schoolgoers who haven't been vaccinated yet to receive vaccines, but also to those people who have been completely vaccinated and still hasn't gotten their boosters. I believe certain age groups of teenagers are now allowed to receive boosters, so they should go ahead and receive their boosters because it clinically clearly benefits them from going into the severe courses of COVID-19. But also, secondly, I think it's keeping the common sense. Even before the pandemic, when a child was sick, we had them stay home for 3 to 5 days before actually going back there. If you are to have, let's say, a sick child at home, the parents still stayed careful not to really transmit to others when they go to workplaces and whatnot. I think that should still be kept in regards to going to schools, even with COVID-19. So people obviously having family members at home having COVID-19 should still refrain from going to school for at least a couple of days to 3 days, possibly, because they would still carry higher chances of transmitting to others, even if the government is not mandating. So keeping the common sense, keeping hygiene, but also staying home for a couple or 3 days if they feel sick, or if it is sure that a family member is sick, then they should refrain from actually being possible of being contagious to other people.
Right, and as you correctly mentioned, of course, and it was also shared by my colleague Song, booster shots for those aged 12 to 17 have started on this Monday. Dr. Kim, also, well, come next Monday, that is, fully vaccinated individuals arriving into the country will be exempt from quarantine. What are your thoughts on the wisdom of this particular exemption given our current COVID-19 situation?
Well, my personal thought is that if the number of just COVID-19 infection in Korea is very small, I think the quarantine in the airport and some border control is very important because somehow we need to just very tightly control the number of just total infection and also just preventing the some emergence of just the variants in our country. But the current situation now, we are actually experiencing more than 300,000 cases of COVID-19 in Korea. And then maybe my thought is that maybe just government has now decided maybe just following some domestic just guideline, maybe just enough instead of just enforcing the very tight the border control as well that we actually did in the previously.
Right, I see. And Professor Kwak, our current COVID-19 restrictions with regard to social gatherings and business hours are poised to end this coming Sunday. What should be our new strategy moving forward, do you think?
Right, as many of the medical experts on not just this program, but many different types of report and media sources have emphasized the peak of the number of patients who are going through severely and also the death rates is yet to come. If we go through the peak of the confirmation cases possibly this week or next week, the peak in the severity rate and also death rate will come possibly a couple of weeks afterwards. And already we're seeing almost very steeply filling up in the ICU bed units, which is quite worrying to me. We have already exceeded 1,100. As I mentioned before, we barely had 800 to 1,000 of bed units before. I don't know how well we have come up with 1,000 more currently. It is bound to jump up in about 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 possible coming weeks. Even if it means temporarily, we need to heavily focus how we're going to manage the upcoming severe patients. Even if it means temporarily, we need to start designated certain medical sectors and hospitals to solely be designated for treating COVID-19 patients in their moderate to severe cases. We would definitely most likely lack the capacity in the coming weeks. So what would that mean for next month or maybe a little more? We need to recruit more medical personnel. We need to recruit more physical spaces to really be able to care for these severe patients. Hopefully from that point on, after it has reached the peak of severe cases and death rates, we would be able to start letting loose of the condition again. But it is clearly foreseen by everyone in the medical sector that we are going into that dire peak in the severe cases and death rates. So we need to prepare ourselves for that at this moment.
Right, preparation is key then. All right, Professor Kwak, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts.
Thank you.
Dr. Kim, thank you very much for your thoughts as well. Right, the gist of the new strategy against Omicron, as emphasized earlier, is a greater sense of personal responsibility to maintain public health. Thank you for watching. See you on Tuesday.